All right. Proverbs 21, verse 5. It says, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to plenty, but those of everyone who is hasty surely to poverty." Now, I'll remind you, before we even start digging into the diagramming of this a little bit, remind you that still, as we're dealing with Proverbs, we're dealing with general principles, and we're dealing with them in the sense of not necessarily an absolute sense, but in a comparative sense. So that if you're diligent versus if you're hasty. So it's not necessarily an absolute promise that if you're diligent, you're going to be rich. Or not an absolute threat that if you're hasty, you're going to be poor. But in comparison to what you might have been, that's what it is. It's a comparative statement of principles that are generally true. And so even as we start thinking about this, keep that in the front of your mind, that this is general truths, general principles. It's not an absolute promise, even though it uses some fairly strong words in there and makes us think, well, it's got to be a promise. In the context of the Proverbs, it is a general principle. So what kind of parallelism is this? And I'll remind you of the various kinds. We have the repeating, which you say the same thing, the contrasting, in which the second line presents really the different or opposite perspective. Developing, the first line is completed, there's adding to it in the second line, and illustrating, so one line is restated in another with a figure of speech. Building, so that each line builds on the ideas in the earlier lines, and there's a movement upward with it, if you will. Pivoting, in which the middle line applies directly to the first and the last lines. It the whole proverb turns on that middle line. Mirroring, the second part repeats the first, but in reverse order. So you have A, B, C, C, B, A. Cause and effect, so that one line states the effect of the behavior, cause the behavior in the other line. And then there's the formal, which is more or less just a statement, a proverbial statement, but it doesn't have the same kind of parallelism as the others. So what kind of parallel is this? It's a contrasting. And again, how do you know this? The word but makes it very clear that this is a parallel or contrasting parallelism here. And this one, there's a lot in this proverb that is very definitely parallel. Sometimes we read the Proverbs and the parallels aren't as clear. This one, the ideas are parallel or contrasting to one another in both lines and almost word for word. So we have the plans of who? The diligent, and that's contrasted with what kind of person? The hasty. So you have planning. Where's the contrast to plans in the second line? Those is referring back to the plans. So you have the plans of the diligent, but those plans is the contrast, and then is the contrasting word in the next one. So we're talking in both lines about the planning. Now, Gene was right, and there is a sense in which there's really not any planning. So we might say the lack of plans, but he's contrasting planning between the first and the second line there. So what's the result of the plans of the diligent? What in the second line? Where do you see the parallel to lead in the second line? It's really not there. It's implied. And I point this out. I think I've mentioned it before, but I remind you again, there are absolutely times where the Proverbs in one line is going to omit words from the first line, but it still intends them. So you can read that. You can put, those of everyone who is hasty lead surely to poverty. I mean, you fit the word in there, it fits perfectly. Proverbs are written to be brief. And so in the conciseness, the shortness of the proverb, they absolutely do leave out words intending you to read them there. And this is one of those cases where if you're looking for parallels, you recognize that the plans of the diligent lead to something. Those plans of the hasty also leads to something. And one of the things that often happens is that word is omitted for emphasis. So it sounds kind of a funny way of doing it. We might put it in bold print or underline it or something. But the Proverbs sometimes leave words out to get your attention, to notice, oh, wait a second, they skipped a word there. There's something they said in the first line they're not saying in the second line. Why didn't they say it? And that's always a question you should be asking. If you're looking at the parallels, especially one like this where you're seeing there's so many, parallel ideas between the two lines. When you see one that's not there, you should be asking, why isn't this one here? And so what it does is it draws your attention. It should have the effect of drawing your attention that just as the plans of the diligent leads to something, so the planning or the poor planning or the lack of planning, whatever it may be of the hasty, it also leads somewhere. So it's not that no planning has no impact, but that it does also lead to something. What do the plans of the hasty lead to? Poverty. So you have, in the language of Proverbs, you have an abundance of good things. So when you read plenty there, it's not necessarily meaning riches. So not necessarily a statement that you will be rich, but rather a statement of you will have enough and you'll have some left over. Is really the idea that he's communicating. The plans of the diligent surely lead to having what you need, having more than you need, but not necessarily prosperity as we might think of a rich person today. So this is not a promise that you're going to have 3 Ferraris in your garage and a boat, or five in your garage. It's simply a promise or a principle. It's not a promise. It's the principle pointing towards good planning leads toward a sufficiency of provision. The poverty does have that opposite idea, a lack, so that you will not have what is needed, that you will do without necessary and good things. And so we can summarize it as I have. Proper planning produces prosperity, but we can't understand it in the sense, again, of wealthiness, but of provision, of ample provision. And so when we're talking about what I put in the notes there, a prudent person or a diligent person, really it's not just the idea of somebody who plods along. That is part of it. But I would say there's a commitment to the task. There is an investment, a mental investment, a personal investment into the task. So they're not just plodding and just going somewhere. But there's a definiteness and a direction. There's a goal in mind of they are looking to this. And they are invested in that with their energy. Their mind, their body, their thoughts, their heart is invested in this, and they're going to go. Let me give you a couple other principles here from this. A hasty decision is costly. We have already captured these ideas. A hasty decision is costly. Ill-considered decisions lead to lack. And then the fool acts impulsively. Proverbs 14:29. he says, the second line, he says, he who is impulsive exalts folly. So again, we're not just talking about decision making in just a completely morally neutral sense. We recognize in bringing other proverbs to bear on this that we are talking about moral issues, matters of wisdom and folly, which are matters of righteousness and wickedness. So there absolutely is a sense where we recognize that this kind of wasteful, destructive impulsiveness is and can be sinful. And so we should recognize that there are some moral imperatives with this. But as you read in the proverb, there is not, certainly is not a statement of do this. And there are many proverbs. There's not a direct statement of you should do this. This is an observational statement. And this is part of, again, how Proverbs work. They observe the world. And Solomon is looking around and he's recognizing that the diligent one, the one who has the investment in it and the discipline to stick to it, his planning is going to lead to plenty because there is that investment. Part of this aspect of diligence is he's going to think well about what he's doing. He's going to wrestle through the direction he's going. Or maybe the product he's selling or the skill that he is developing. So you put yourself back in this time period, there is not any manufacturing processes. There are no assembly lines. The industrial world doesn't exist. So everything is handmade. So you go to, you think I'm going to start a business of making lamps. I'm going to, they're little handcrafted things. You think like Aladdin's lamp. That's much more likely what we're talking about. It may have a little kind of spout on the end. It's certainly going to be an open container. It's going to be a bowl-like thing. It's going to have some handles on it. And it has to do two things really, really well. It has to hold the fuel and it has to hold the wick. From there, depending on your customers, you probably want something that is attractive. So somebody says, I'm going to make lamps. Now he needs to plan. He needs to think about where he's getting his materials. The mud, the clay that he's using. He needs to think about his kilns and his fuel for the fire. Can he get a kiln and can he get sufficient fuel and can he make it sure that he gets a fire hot enough to bake this clay properly? Where's he going to get his wicks? And if he's providing wicks, does he have the necessary skills, or can he learn the necessary skills to properly form this vessel and then to form it in a way that is attractive? Or does he need to hire out the painting of them? And there are a lot of them that are very, very basic. So, but if he were making a little bit nicer ones, does he need to hire out somebody to paint them and to do designs on it? And thinking through all of those things. And a hasty one says, I watched on TV last night that I can make $1,000 a week from home making my own lamps and selling them on Etsy. He looks at it, and the hasty one just says, I'm going to do that. And he runs out, buys a kiln, gets a big bucket of mud from somewhere, and sits down and starts trying to make these things. What's going to happen to the hasty one that's done that? Yeah, he's going to make poor quality product because he probably doesn't have the information to even know what he should be getting. So he's going to buy the kiln that, everybody rated really, really high. All the other impulsive people rated really, really high, but it actually doesn't heat evenly. And he's going to get the mud from the guy next door who swears that this is the best mud to use. He doesn't have any information to actually go on. He doesn't know what he's doing. But he's going to spend money on the tools he thinks he needs. And he doesn't even have the talent to make something that looks good. So he produces a couple misshapen lumps with a little bit of a concavity in it, and nobody wants it. And because he's impulsive, this lasts for 2 weeks, and then he's on to something else. And all of that money's gone. He might try to sell the kiln, but he's not going to get a fraction of what he paid for it. The diligent one, because there is that proper investment in it, is actually, I'm assuming for the sake of the illustration, he's starting from scratch, with nothing. He just, whatever reason, this is where he goes and sets up shop. He's going to go find other people who make and sell these lamps. Maybe he's going to hire himself out, or to be hired as an apprentice for some of these people. That'd be a really good idea, to learn what's happening. In the course of learning the trade, he's going to learn what kind of materials he has to have and cannot use. He's going to learn what kind of kilns he needs and does not need. He's going to learn maybe some of the tricks of the trade. He's going to learn some of the ways of actually making a product that looks really good. And he's going to do it without having to invest all of the upfront cost of the machinery or whatever that he needs. But he's going to think through it. And then when he does finally, maybe he's apprenticed out for 5 years, and he finally makes the leap to open his own shop. He already knows people in the business. He may already have a customer base, unless he signed a non-compete clause in his contracts there, and he's going to have access to the proper materials, the proper tools, to actually start well. And because he's invested a considerable amount of time and energy into this, it's not likely that he is going to be in open shop for 6 months and then close down and go try something new. He's going to, even though the startup is going to be more expensive than he imagined and the customers aren't going to be there like he thought they were at first, and it's going to take him a little bit of time to get going, there's going to be that follow-through, that stick-to-itiveness to ultimately succeed. And part of what Solomon is describing is one who has started at a proper starting point, has thought well, has worked well, and continues to persist in that work so that he can come to a point of success. This is exactly the opposite of, you can get rich quick by, selling this, making this. Sign up here, work from home, make $5,000 a week. This is not a get-rich-quick scheme at all. It is an invested life into a skill and a trade, into a business of some sort. And that is what leads to the plenty, the sufficiency there. So again, this is descriptive, but there are some that really does call us to do some certain things. There are some ways that we apply this to our life. So how would you apply the principles of this verse? Plan well and wisely. Let me give you a couple other ones, restating what we've already said. Develop a wise plan, then stick to it. And there's room for tweaking the plan as you go along. So it's not It's not a sense of once you've laid out this grand scheme and you're never going to vary no matter what. But if you've done the work well, if you've done the planning well, there's not going to be a lot of need to change. You're going to tweak things, but there's not going to be necessarily need for major changes. You develop a wise plan, you stick to it. And then part of what I think this certainly implies to us is do not make major decisions in haste. So there really should be the sense of the bigger the decision, the more carefully I'm going to make it, the more I'm going to think through this, the more I'm going to work out the not just the pros and cons, that may be valid, but I'm going to work out the cost, the consequences, the benefits, so, if you want to say the risk and the reward, but not just monetarily either. We're working this out, and certainly from a biblical perspective of what is the right thing to do? What are the moral consequences if I make this decision? What is the possible implications of my life? How is this going to affect my ability to minister, my ability to attend church? How is it going to affect my relationship with other believers, my opportunities of presenting the gospel? These are all necessary questions. As you're working through major decisions, do not make them in haste. Now, I will say, and this will touch on this kind of from a different perspective in the next major point here, but I will say this doesn't mean we should be wishy-washy. There really is a point of we're careful in making the decision, but we do need to make a decision. We can't put it off indefinitely, but to make a good decision. I think Bruce Waltke really summarized this well. The lazy are deficient in action. We talked about them the last couple of weeks. The hasty in thought. So the hasty one is deficient in his thought. You've probably heard it said many times, those who fail to plan to fail. As far as I could tell, the original quote is from this guy, H.K. Williams, if you fail to prepare, you are preparing to fail. So for those of you that care anything about the origin of the quote, I think as far as I could find, that's where that started. Now the question should come up, where does faith come into all of this? Is it just entirely my planning? I'm just going to lay out this. Maybe I'll say a prayer before I start planning. I'll find some Bible verses, but from there it's just me. Where does faith come into this? Proverbs 16:9 says, a man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. So what kind of parallelism is this? Again, it's contrasting parallelism. So in this one, we also still have a very close comparison between the two lines. So we have, who's the first individual in this verse? A man. And we have his heart. So are we talking about the inner man or the outer man? Yeah, the inner man here, so that we're talking about an internal planning here, and that's what we see in just a minute here. We have the second person is the Lord. You have the man plans. So you have the thinking through, the reasoning through. What does the Lord do? Directs. Does this mean the man should not plan? No. Based on the other proverb, clearly there's an instruction that it is better to plan. And the way this proverb is written, it is not saying a man's heart plans his ways, but he's wrong to do so because it's actually the Lord that directs his steps. Rather, it is the Lord who directs, the man plans. What does the man plan? His way. And again, it is his. So in this case, he's looking, if you will, for himself. He's looking at his own way there. We have the Lord directs the same person. the man's steps. Ultimately, it's his whole life. So it's going to be his being. A man's heart plans the way he's going to live. It lays out in some way the course of his life. Now, the hasty or the thoughtless one, he may not lay it out very clearly or very well, but he certainly has some urges that are leading him on, some desires that are there. A wise man is planning well. He's thinking well about the course of his life and where he is going, where he's going to end up. He's thinking well about his entire life. And that's ultimately, this word way is just simply speaking of your entire person, your entire being, your entire life. It's everything that of who you are is what this word way usually encompasses in the book of Proverbs. And so we have the man's heart now is planning the course of his life. But what does the Lord do? He now directs his steps. And in the nature of the parallel here, I think we have to read steps as way. Maybe are tempted to read way, the whole course of his life, the steps, the individual decisions. I think in the nature of the parallelism, it really is speaking of the course of life. But what he does, in speaking of steps, he does remind us that the individual decisions are what determine the course of your life. Does that make sense what I'm saying there and what I think Solomon is doing here? You have the contrast of the whole course of your life as a step by step by step. The Lord directs each of those steps to achieve the course of life that he determines. So one of the things I would say is maybe a little bit more obscure from this is no plan is completely objective. And so what I mean by that is there is no plan that is simply a mathematical formula. I have an objective point value system to all of this stuff. So how much money I'm going to make, what kind of house I'm going to live in, what kind of car I'm going to live, what car I'm going to drive, what my spiritual life is going to be like, married life is going to be like, how many kids I'm going to have, when I'm going to retire, how much money, and I'm going to have this life laid out, and everything is this mathematical certainty that, my goal is this. And now if I'm going to achieve that, then I have to invest, if you will, this, and this, and all of these numbers, and I'm just going to simply add it up and determine that to get this, I have to do this, and that's what I'm going to do. Every plan, it comes out of the heart. It comes out of there's that seat of our being, that seat of our desires and emotions, so that the plans are subjective in the sense that they are driven by what we want, because out of the heart comes all of the issues of the life. So it's driven by what we want, and it's driven really somewhat by just what are we willing to do. So look, I could be a millionaire by the time I'm 30 if I will do this, and this. I don't really want to do that. That's what I mean. It's not completely objective. I may think that would be really nice. I want to achieve that. But then we have our emotions and desires that are there, that our heart is now shaping how we even approach the potential plans of our life. So, you think about the career path that you have taken. Why did you take that career path? And I doubt it was there's most money in it or there's most life satisfaction in it. It probably can't be quantified or nailed down in just one single thing. There's going to be a wide range of things. A big part of that is going to be it's what I enjoy doing. It's what I wanted to do. And so there may be even, you may have even turned down, more lucrative or more appealing options to do something else because of what you really wanted. That's what I mean when I say it's not completely objective, is there is that simple subjectivity of this is the desire of my heart. I may not always be able even to define it and state it clearly, but there is that there that has shaped what I'm doing, shaped the decisions that I'm making. Part of what I have down is one's heart shapes his plan. So we recognize that, again, what we are choosing is a reflection of what's within us. So it's not just there's some elements of subjectivity in that, but it's also as a revelation of who we are, who we truly are, that our heart shapes, affects what we do. So that the plans we make, if my heart is righteous, my heart is wise, my plans will tend to be righteous and wise. If my heart is wicked and my heart is foolish, what are my plans going to be? They're going to be wicked and foolish. A few other things, and these aren't quite so plain. So let me maybe give them to you here. But your bullets: no plan is completely objective. I've already said that. One's heart shapes his plans. What's within shapes what you do. We also draw from this that God works through the plans of men. Again, this proverb is not a condemnation of planning, but rather, I think we recognize, and we know from other proverbs that it is God that works through what we plan. So Proverbs 16:1 says, "The preparations of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord." We touched on that one several weeks ago, but it's a good one to go back to and think through. We prepare. You think through a decision, study, and work through whatever you need to work through. But ultimately, the end product, the answer, is coming from the Lord. And as the Proverbs do, they use a specific instance, a concrete example of a general principle. So this doesn't apply. Proverbs 16:1, we cannot limit it just to words. That I think about what I'm going to say, and then the Lord gives me the answer when I need it. That's true. It also is I plan through what I'm going to do. And God gives the direction that I need. But it is not independent of that planning. It's not divorced from that planning. But many, many times we would say it is in conjunction with that planning. Not always in the way that we thought that it was going to work out, but that God works through the plans of men. I'll give you a very easy personal example. I went to Bible college intending to be an itinerant evangelist. A guy that pulls a fifth wheel trailer, goes to a church for a week, preaches, goes to another church for a week, preaches, and does that all the time. And so my training, I had some, because of the Bible college I went to, I had training in Greek and in exegesis and exposition and homiletics and all this preaching stuff. And so I had training in theology and Bible study related stuff. And yet I had no intention of being a pastor. It wasn't on my radar at all. And I went and planned, and I had a definite plan. And in accord with that plan, as I got close to graduating, I went to a traveling evangelist who was doing what I wanted to do and said, what do you think I should do? Here, I'm looking at this, what I want to do. What should I do? I'm trying to plan well. And he said, you need to go work in a church. Understand what it means to be a pastor. And so, okay. And I did. Intending fully, as y'all know, I've talked about it before, intending fully to step into itinerant evangelism. And yet God taking those preparations to go that direction and using them to move me into a completely different direction than I ever thought I was going to go. And so we're not, we're saying God works through the plans of man. Sometimes we have to be ready for God to take our planning and say, now you're going here. You thought you were going that way, but you just thought that. You're going this way. Does that mean all of that time I spent doing, preparing for evangelism was wasted? No, not at all. That time I spent in Bible college was incredibly valuable in preparing me for pastoral ministry. And so we recognize that God works through the plans of men, and a corollary with that, right, going really hand in hand, and God's will overrules man's plan. So that that really is what this verse is stating. You plan, God directs. God's will ultimately is the one that is going to be accomplished because God is sovereign. His will is going to be accomplished. However, God's sovereignty does not negate the need to plan. So I cannot say, well, God's sovereign. Whatever He decreed to happen will happen. Therefore, I'm just going to not plan, not worry. I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. And there it is. It's not the way that works at all. God expects us to plan and prepare well. Even if He turns us a direction we didn't know we were going, to do the best we can with the information that we have, we must plan. And we must also then trust His sovereignty to direct us in the right direction. And with that, we recognize God is ultimately in control of every person's life. God's ultimately in control. We must submit to His control. Again, not in an impulsive way of every feeling I have or every urge I get or every obstacle that comes up or every opportunity that opens up that I just jump from one thing to the next to the next. There's still the careful planning, the diligent thoughtfulness, not the impulsive hastiness, but to diligently plan, but also recognizing that God is in control. So application of these things as we plan. Just that simple. Plan. Plan your day. Plan your week. Plan your retirement. Or plan your vacation. Plan your next purchase. Plan to buy the car. Plan to save, to invest, whatever it may be. To make the plans. And absolutely is what Proverbs teaches us. Make the plans. But be adaptable to God's disposition of events. The problem is not planning. The problem is when my planning locks me into something, and so that if things don't go the way I planned, I'm now angry. Now I'm blaming God as if He let me down. Now I'm worried, as if God doesn't know what He's doing, and I can't trust Him to direct me rightly. We have to be adaptable to what God is actually going to do. Do not trust your own planning. And by that I mean, do not place your ultimate confidence in what you've planned. You may have a great goal for your next 5 years. You may think, I've got it all worked out. My retirement's right where it needs to be. If the stock market doesn't crash, everything will be hunky-dory. I've got a good plan. And you're resting secure in the plan. Don't do that. Because the plan is not your security. Rather, you trust God's control. So that if your plan completely fails, you still trust that God's in control. God is still good and wise and loving. So we simply trust God. You plan well, but recognize God makes the final disposition of events. Say it another way, I've already touched on this, study well, but realize God gives the words. We also need to recognize Proverbs 21:30 points us to the reality that only God's plans always work out. We cannot imagine that our plans are going to happen perfectly. Proverbs 21:30 says there's no wisdom or understanding or counsel against the Lord. God's plans always work out. Nobody else's does. Unfortunately, for time's sake, I'm going to have to just race through these things. But here's somewhat else of what Proverbs says and teaches us about wise planning. It says, order your work. Do things in the proper order. In fact, Proverbs 24:27 says, prepare your work in the field, then build the house. There's a proper order. Take care of that which you need to take care of first, and then take care of that which you need to take care of second. And just think through the order. Do things in the right order and plan it and do it. He says as well, look ahead. Proverbs 27, I'm going to summarize it, but the gist of it is to make sure your flocks are in good shape now. Well, I think in that particular proverb, he's indicating while you're healthy, you're young, you're able to get everything set, you're able to walk the hills with the herds and all of that. Take care of the flocks now so that you build them and they're growing. You have a secure herd so that when you're older and not able to build a flock, you have sufficient to last you through your years. I think that's one application of what he's saying there. Seek counsel. Seek godly, wise counsel. So that you're, and there's a sense of, we're talking about the seeking wise counsel, that it's appropriate to seek secular counsel in certain things. It's appropriate to go to a banker and say, what's the best way to make, to secure a right loan that's not going to break me? It's not going to get me in too much debt for too long a period of time. It's appropriate to go to a broker and say, what's the best way to invest this money? Or what's the best way to pull this money out of this investment? Then I'm not going to give half of it to, pay half of it in taxes. Seeking counsel from those who are experts in the field, even if they're not Christian, is valid. But what Solomon says is seek counsel. Do not brag about what you're going to do. Proverbs 27:1 says, do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth. Don't brag about it. Plan. Plan to do good. So you're looking at your planning. Again, this is a moral issue. Plan to do righteousness, good things, but also realize the limits of planning. It's another way of saying we recognize our plans don't always work out. I'll give you a few quotes from various people who have ran into this truth. Helmut von Moltke, however you say that name, said no plan survives first contact with the enemy, military leader. Mike Tyson said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. It's the same idea, actually. Hamlet, in less comprehensible terms, says there's divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them as we will. And all of them are saying we plan, but our plans are limited. And we're say, as we're thinking about this, human planning and trust in the Lord are complementary. They are not contradictory. I can't stress this enough. I know there are those in churches and among Christians who say, well, I'm trusting the Lord. I don't need to plan. I don't need to think about that. I'm just trusting the Lord. No, they go together. Proverbs ties them together. And so it is always wise to prepare for what lies ahead. And it is always wise to rely upon God to give success. Or as it's been more simply stated, man proposes, but God disposes. And we recognize that God is the one ruling over all things. So what do? We guard our hearts. As our plans come out of our hearts, we guard our hearts so that our planning will be righteous. We recognize as well that good planning requires wisdom. That's all that I was describing about the diligent. It's various ways of speaking of the functions and the operations of wisdom. Good planning requires wisdom, so we must think deeply and wisely about what you will do. And you must Be methodical in your decisions and actions. And in the sense of there is thoughtfulness that is going into what you're doing. You're not acting on whims, but there is a method. And so I don't necessarily mean that you are slow about every decision. There should be some decisions we can make very quickly, but everyone must have a method. That we know the biblical truth, we know the principles that we are following, we know how this is affecting our life choices, the direction of our life, so that I'm taking this step because it is in accord with the way that I need to go. And so it may be a very quick decision, but it's still methodical in its making. We must also, on the other side, do not use faith to excuse poor planning. We cannot say that it's simply, well, the Lord told me, or I'm just trusting the Lord, and whatever will be, will be. God does not give us that liberty to do that. Proverbs teaches us to plan. I think we see in the New Testament, we see the example of people who planned, who thought well. They absolutely trusted in the Lord. But they thought well about what they were doing. I'll give a simple, quick example. Paul's missionary methods. Paul seems to have a very clear plan in mind in the preaching of the gospel. We know when he went into the cities, he went to the synagogues first, and when he was rejected in the synagogues, then he went to the Gentiles. We also see, though, Paul went to major urban areas for the most part, not every case. But he went to major cities and seemed to have started churches there that could then start churches elsewhere. There's an evidence of a plan at work. He wasn't just haphazardly walking down the road saying, Lord, which way should I go now? We also recognize, though, in the book of Acts, he wanted to go here and God said no. He wanted to go here and God said no. He said, go to Macedonia. So we have the example of planning and obedience to the clear direction of the Lord when it went a way other than what Paul planned. And so these things all work together. We cannot just excuse our bad planning by saying, well, I'm just trusting the Lord. Proper trust plans. Seek advice from the wise. The wisest advisor is God. Seek His direction in all things. Pray for wisdom, His wisdom. Plan to do right. I mean, really, that's what a lot of this comes down to. If we're looking at the choices that we have every single day, we should be planning to do what is right before we're confronted with the choice. There should be that diligent thought. So we're studying through Proverbs so that we know how we should speak. And so we're thinking through, what kind of words should I be using? What kind of tone should I be using? How should I speak? And I'm planning now, before I'm ever confronted with the situation I don't even know is coming, I'm planning now to speak rightly. I am planning now, and I'm preparing my heart now so that I will naturally speak rightly. Because I have wisdom within, I have righteousness within, so that what comes out of my mouth will be righteous and wise. That there should be that preparation to do right. And that wisdom plans. When we do that, we can quote the very famous Colonel Hannibal Smith and say, I love it when a plan comes together.